The third exorcist was, in King Daniel Severin's opinion, the most theatrical. He wore a hat that added roughly 2 feet to his height, waved a censer billowing lavender-scented smoke so thick it was technically a fire hazard, and chanted in a dead language that Daniel was increasingly sure he was making up on the spot. Daniel stood beside the grand fireplace with his arms folded and his face arranged into what he hoped was the expression of a king who was in control of the situation, and not a man who had jumped 6 inches off the ground 40 minutes ago because a draft blew a door shut. He had, in fact, jumped. His beta, Julian Croft, had seen it. Julian had said nothing. Julian never said anything. This was worse than if he'd said something. "I sense its presence," the exorcist, Master Fenwick, declared, spinning in a circle with his censer raised. A glob of hot ash landed on the priceless Severin rug. Neither man acknowledged it. A cold and sorrowful spirit trapped between worlds. The part of Daniel that never performed, that sat underneath 28 years of political composure like a current under ice, had a blunt assessment. This man is a fraud. We are afraid of our own house, and we are paying a fraud. He couldn't argue with that. He'd spent 3,000 gold pieces on exorcisms this month. That was an entire village's grain budget. He was the Alpha King. He commanded armies, negotiated with dragons, and stared down rival packs without blinking. And he was being terrorized by unexplained noises. "Can you banish it?" Daniel asked, his voice admirably steady for a man who had slept with a lit candle on his nightstand for the past 2 weeks, like a child afraid of the dark. Julian, standing by the door, blinked once. It was the Julian equivalent of howling with laughter. 20 feet down the hall, inside a linen closet, May Swift was trying to become one with a stack of spare blankets. Don't breathe. Don't move. Don't exist. She pressed her fingers harder over her mouth. She could hear the exorcist chanting, the king's low voice, and, if she strained, what sounded like Julian Croft sighing with his entire body. The part of her that didn't understand panic, the deep animal current that ran underneath her constant anxiety, like bedrock under a landslide, was unmoved. Good position. Small space, soft materials. Scent coverage adequate. We are well hidden. May had not hidden strategically. May had hidden the way a startled cat hides, by launching herself at the nearest dark hole with no plan and a lot of momentum. She'd been halfway through polishing the ancestral shields in the West Gallery when her rag snagged on the edge of the Shield of Sorrows. There was a moment, a beautiful crystalline moment, where she saw it begin to tip and thought, very clearly, no. The Shield of Sorrows weighed 40 pounds and did not care about her feelings. It fell from its mount with a sound like God slamming a door. The echo bounced off every stone surface in the corridor, multiplying as it went, until what had been a single clang became a rolling, thunderous boom that probably registered on seismographs in neighboring kingdoms. She'd made it to the closet in what might have been a personal speed record. The confident part of her brain had filed this as, excellent evasive maneuver, quick reflexes, well done. It was not well done. Nothing about her life was well done. This was the third exorcist this month. The first had been a stern priestess who sprinkled salted water on every surface. The marble floors of the West Gallery had become an ice rink. May had discovered this the following night, when she'd rounded a corner at her usual hurried pace, and her feet had simply left the ground. She'd slid 12 feet on her back, arms windmilling, and crashed into a decorative urn. The urn had survived. Her dignity and her left hip had not. The guards who found the urn slightly out of position the next morning had added object displacement by spectral force to the haunting log. The second exorcist had been a pair of ghost-hunting brothers who set up a grid of electronic gadgets across the grand hall. The gadgets beeped whenever a glimmer weasel, small, furry, and everywhere in old castles, skittered through the walls. May had been tiptoeing past, in what she considered to be an act of considerable stealth, when her foot found the one power cord connecting the entire grid. She went down. The grid went dark. 14 hours of data, gone. The brothers had been ecstatic. The entity, they told a very tired Daniel the next morning, is not only sentient, it's technologically sophisticated. It targeted our equipment with surgical precision. Daniel had paid them double. He'd also started triple locking his bedroom door at night, which May knew because she was the one who polished the locks. The deep, steady part of her had catalogued the power cord incident as eliminated enemy surveillance, decisive. Now Master Fenwick's voice was reaching a crescendo. Begone, restless spirit! This House of Severin is no longer your domain. May squeezed her eyes shut. I'm trying. I'm really, really trying to be gone. The ceremony concluded with a final dramatic shout, a tremendous quantity of smoke, and a small velvet pouch that allegedly contained a protective charm and definitely contained a rock. That will be an additional 50 gold, Master Fenwick said, handing it over with the solemnity of a man who had not just charged a king for gravel. Daniel accepted it. He examined it. Julian examined it from across the room with an expression that could have curdled milk. An additional 50, Julian repeated flatly, after the exorcist had scurried away trailing lavender and opportunism. For a pouch. Containing a rock. It's a blessed rock, Julian. It's limestone, Your Majesty. I can see the fossil. Daniel looked down at the pouch. There was, in fact, a small fossil visible through the velvet. Something that might have been a fern, or possibly a very old shrimp. He tossed it into the fire. Working as a night maid in the royal palace had seemed like a dream job for an Omega like May. Quiet hours, solitary work, no witnesses to the ongoing catastrophe of her physical existence. She was not a graceful person. She was not even an averagely coordinated person. She occupied a position on the coordination spectrum somewhere between newborn deer and shopping cart with one bad wheel. Doors she approached swung into her. Flat surfaces developed invisible obstacles. She once tripped going up a staircase, which shouldn't have been physically possible, and the resulting tumble had broken a vase, dislodged a portrait of Grand Alpha Tiberius, and traumatized a passing cat. The deep, unshakable part of her brain maintained, against all evidence, that she was doing fine. Better than fine. Well. Strong performance. Cleared multiple obstacles in rapid succession. The cat was in the way. The universe had placed her in the one building on Earth where her every fumble echoed for minutes. A dropped tray of silverware in the kitchens became spectral wailing. An overturned bucket was a weeping phantom. The Sir Reginald incident had generated a formal report that was 3 pages long and included the phrase, "the vengeful shade of the resplendent one." She'd read it pinned to the servants' board and had wanted to die. And it was getting worse. The more exorcists Daniel hired, the more nervous May became. The more nervous she became, the clumsier she got. The clumsier she got, the more haunted the palace seemed. She was caught in an escalating feedback loop of anxiety and property damage, and she couldn't see a way out that didn't involve her becoming a different person entirely. She made it back to the servants' quarters after Master Fenwick left, her shift over, her nerves shot. She couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the king's face through the crack in the closet door. He hadn't just been annoyed or angry, he'd looked lost, frightened. A king, frightened in his own home. And it was her fault. Her hands, usually so treacherous, were steady as she worked in the kitchens. This was the one place her body seemed to know what it was doing. She kneaded dough for the morning's bread, the familiar rhythm silencing everything else. Push, fold, turn. Her core wound, the deep-seated belief that she was simply not enough, quieted to a dull ache when she was baking. Here she could create something that wouldn't shatter. Correct. We are skilled. The dough responds well. She baked a small loaf of honey oat bread, the king's favorite according to the kitchen inventory logs she definitely had not been reading with personal interest. She wrapped it in a clean cloth. It was a pathetic apology for 3,000 gold pieces worth of exorcism, but it was all she had. She would resign in the morning. The ghost of Severin Palace would finally be gone for good. The thought brought a surprising pang. Despite the constant terror of being discovered, she'd liked it here. She liked the quiet hum of the palace at night, the moonlight on the marble, the distant rumbling sound of the king's laughter when he sparred with Julian at dawn. She'd liked the weight of the history in the walls, and the way the kitchen smelled at 4 a.m. when the bread was just coming out of the ovens. None of that mattered. She was a hazard. Leaving was the most responsible thing she could do. The next night, she didn't come to work. Daniel noticed immediately. Not because the midnight crash was absent, though it was. Not because the air was still, though it was. He noticed because the palace felt wrong. Specifically, it felt like a room where someone had removed a piece of furniture. You couldn't always say what was missing, but you kept looking at the spot where it had been. She's gone. The thought arrived before he could examine it. Not, the ghost is gone. She. He shoved that aside. The exorcism had worked. That was a good thing. He should be relieved. He was not relieved. He was pacing the library at midnight, straining his ears for a sound that didn't come. The silence pressed on him like a physical weight. He'd spent weeks desperate for it to stop, and now that it had, the quiet was worse. The chaotic crashes had been unnerving, but they'd been alive. This was just empty. By the second night, he was checking the West Gallery twice. He told himself he was verifying the shield was secure. He was actually smelling the air for traces of lemon polish and something else. Something warm. Yeast, maybe. Bread. We miss her. The thought arrived without permission, plain as a church bell. We miss the noise. We miss whatever she is. The ghost, Daniel corrected aloud, to an empty corridor at 2 a.m. We don't think it's a ghost. We have never thought it was a ghost. We didn't want to say so because it would have been embarrassing. By the third night, Daniel was a wreck. He found himself standing beside Sir Reginald the Resplendent in the grand hall at 1 a.m, hands in his pockets, staring at the suit of armor like a man visiting a grave. He reached up to straighten the helmet, and his fingers brushed against a thin film of lemon-scented polish. Someone had been taking care of Sir Reginald. Someone who used this specific polish. Who came here in the quiet hours. Who worked carefully and alone, and apparently sent suits of armor flying in the process. He strode to the kitchens. The head cook, Martha, was overseeing the morning prep. Martha had been head cook for 3 kings and was afraid of nothing, including this one. The night maid, Daniel said, his voice sharper than he intended. The Omega, where is she? Martha didn't look up from the bread she was scoring. May? She resigned, Your Majesty, left 3 days ago, didn't say where she was going. She paused. Left a loaf of honey oat bread, though, best I've tasted in 40 years. If you find her, tell her I want the recipe. It clicked. The silence, the lemon polish, the scent of bread. The ghost wasn't a ghost. It was a clumsy Omega maid who baked like an angel and moved through the world like a series of small explosions. We told you. We told you days ago. You didn't listen because listening would have meant admitting you noticed her before any of this started. That wasn't, he hadn't. Her heartbeat, 3rd week. She was in the corridor outside the council chamber at 11 at night, and we heard her heartbeat before we heard her footsteps. We noticed. We have been noticing. Find her, he said to Julian, who had materialized beside him with the silent efficiency of a man who had been anticipating this order for approximately 72 hours. Check every bakery, every inn, every boarding house in a 50-mile radius. Find May Swift. Julian produced a small notebook. I have a list of 17 bakeries within that range. Shall I start with the ones currently advertising for help, or would you prefer a grid search? Daniel stared at him. You already have a list. I like to be prepared, Your Majesty. May had found a job at a small bakery in the village of Thornfield, 20 miles from the capital. It was run by a kindly old man named Amos, who was substantially deaf and didn't notice when she knocked over a sack of flour, creating a mushroom cloud that covered half the shop. 2 customers had walked in, looked at the white-dusted wreckage, looked at May standing in the center of it like a ghost herself, and walked back out without a word. Amos, reading the newspaper at the counter, had not looked up. It was liberating. And achingly lonely. She missed the palace. She missed the gleam of the polished floors, the weight of ancient history in the air, the specific smell of old stone and beeswax. She missed Martha's gruff morning nods. She missed the sound of the king's voice echoing down corridors at odd hours. She was shaping rolls one afternoon when the bell over the door chimed. She didn't look up until a pair of immaculate, expensive leather boots stopped directly in front of her workstation. Her eyes traveled up, past tailored black trousers, a fine wool tunic, and an expression of profound, wordless judgment, to the face of Julian Croft. "May Swift," he said. "His Majesty requires your presence." May's stomach dropped through the floor. She released the roll she was holding. It landed in a bowl of egg wash with a sad, wet plop. "I resigned," she managed. "The king considers that a clerical error." Julian's eyes moved slowly across the bakery, the flour dust, the sagging shelves, the cat sleeping in a breadbasket. "He is keen to rectify it." "Am I being arrested?" Julian appeared to consider this. Not at this time. This was not reassuring. The journey back was a silent, agonizing blur. May sat in the royal carriage, twisting her apron in her hands, mentally composing her last words. Julian sat opposite her, reading a small, leather-bound book and radiating the energy of someone who was exactly where he expected to be. "Is he angry?" May asked once. Julian turned a page. "The king has not slept in 3 days, has shouted at 2 council members and a decorative shrub, and this morning asked me whether ghosts can resign." He looked at her over the top of his book. "Draw your own conclusions." Julian led her not to the dungeons, which she'd been bracing for, but to the king's private study. It was warm, lined with books, a fire crackling in the hearth. King Daniel was standing by the window with his back to her. He looked bigger in this room, more real. "Your Majesty," she whispered. She attempted a curtsy. It was a wobbly, uncertain thing, like a baby deer trying to bow. He turned. His eyes were amber and tired and saw too much. He wasn't angry. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could put it down, but didn't quite believe it yet. "She's here. She's actually here." Relief, a flood of it, more than expected. Why is she standing so far away? This distance is wrong. He kept his face composed. "They tell me you resigned." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Why?" She couldn't lie, not to this face. "Because of the ghost, sire." A flicker of understanding. "The ghost has been quiet since you left." "Yes." She took a breath so deep it felt like it came from her feet. "Your Majesty, there is no ghost." The silence was absolute. "The shield falling was me," she said, the words tumbling out like they'd been waiting months to escape. "I snagged it with my dustcloth. The wailing in the kitchens was a tray of spoons I dropped down the service stairs, all 40 of them. The weeping phantom was a mop bucket I kicked over while I was trying to pick up the sponge I'd already dropped twice. Sir Reginald, I got tangled in the tapestry next to him and fell sideways, and he just went. I didn't even touch him directly, he just went, like he'd been waiting for an excuse." She was talking faster now, a dam broken. "The cold drafts are windows I forget to close. The mysterious scratching was me trying to get a splinter out of the wainscoting with a butter knife. The time the library books flew off the shelf. I was on the ladder and I sneezed. I sneeze hard, sire. It's a whole-body experience." Daniel's expression was unreadable. "I'm clumsy," she said. "Not occasionally or charmingly, constantly, spectacularly. I trip over things that aren't there. I break things I'm not touching. I once knocked over a candelabra by walking past it too quickly. I am the worst nightmaid in the history of domestic service. And I have cost you 3,000 gold pieces in exorcism fees." To prove the universe's commitment to the bit, as she took a frantic step back, her heel caught the leg of an ornate table. On the table sat a vase decorated with painted dragons. Time slowed. She windmilled. She pleaded silently with gravity. Gravity was not taking meetings. Her elbow connected with the vase. It detonated, spraying ceramic dragon parts across the floor like festive shrapnel. The silence that followed was so complete, May could hear the fire thinking about going out. Then, a sound. Small. Strangled. She looked up, bracing for the axe. Daniel's hand was over his mouth. His shoulders were shaking. His eyes were streaming. He was laughing. It started as a choked, desperate thing, like a man trying not to drown, and then it broke open into a full-throated, rolling, helpless laugh that shook his entire body. He grabbed the edge of his desk. He slid sideways. He actually slapped his own knee, which May had never seen a real person do. "I have spent," he wheezed, barely getting the words out, 3,000 gold pieces on exorcisms. "I'm very sorry, Your Majesty. To banish a woman who sneezes hard. It really is a whole-body experience." This destroyed him completely. He ended up sitting on the floor behind his desk, tears running into his collar, making sounds that were barely human. Julian, who had been standing by the door, closed his eyes briefly in what was either a prayer for patience or the closest he ever came to amusement. "So," Daniel finally managed, climbing to his feet with the dignity of a man who had not just been on the floor. "I'm not cursed. My castle isn't haunted. I'm just employing someone who has a personal vendetta against physics." "I'll resign again," May said, cheeks burning. "Properly. Permanently." "Absolutely not." The grin that spread across his face was so sudden and so genuine, it changed him. It took years off his face and chased every shadow from his eyes. He looked at the shattered vase, then at her. A decision was being made behind his expression. "Also," he said, his tone carefully casual, "you owe me for the exorcisms. And this vase." May's stomach sank. "I can't afford that. That's more than I'll make in my life." "I'm aware." He circled his desk, stopping in front of her, close enough that she could smell cedar and wind, and something underneath both that made the steady, confident part of her brain go very still and pay attention. "This is interesting. This person is interesting. Move closer." "So we'll arrange an alternative payment plan?" he said. "What kind of plan?" "Dinner, with me, in my private dining room, every week, until the debt is cleared." He did a quick theatrical calculation. "At your current salary, that should take roughly 75 years. May stared at him. "Is that acceptable, Ms. Swift?" She looked at the laughing king, at the wreckage at her feet, and at the impossible, ridiculous future he was offering. A future where he knew what she was and wasn't sending her away. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said, barely above a whisper. "That's acceptable." "Excellent. First dinner is tomorrow. Try not to break anything on your way out." She broke a door handle. Julian fixed it without comment. The first dinner was the most awkward event of May's life, and she had once sneezed during a moment of silence at a memorial service. She was wearing a simple blue dress, one of two she owned that wasn't a work uniform. It felt like tissue paper in the opulence of the king's private dining room. The table was laden with food served on gleaming silver platters she was maintaining a respectful 6-inch distance from at all times. Daniel sat opposite her, looking far more relaxed than she felt. He dismissed the servers. Fewer witnesses, but also no buffer. "So," he said, attempting to break a silence that had lasted 4 minutes and was developing a personality of its own. "Tell me about the bakery." "It was nice, sire." May was gripping her fork with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. "The owner is hard of hearing." "Convenient." "Yes." Silence. 45 seconds of it. A log shifted in the fireplace and May flinched so hard her knee hit the underside of the table. The water glasses trembled. Daniel caught his before it tipped. He was getting faster at that. "He's watching us. He doesn't flinch when we flinch. This is unusual." The steady part of her filed it without anxiety or hope, just interest. To distract herself, she focused on the food. The roast chicken was good, the potatoes fluffy, but the bread. She picked up a piece and her baker's hands took over, turning it, testing the crumb. "The proving time was too short," she murmured, "and the oven was too hot. That's why the crust is right, but the inside is underdone." Daniel paused, fork midair. "You can tell just by looking at it?" May flushed. "I'm sorry, sire, it's—" "Don't be sorry, that's remarkable." He put his bread down with the expression of a man reappraising everything he'd ever eaten. "I've been telling Martha for months that the bread tastes like mild regret. Now I know why." "Mild regret," May repeated, and a startled laugh escaped her. "That's an accurate flavor profile." Something shifted in Daniel's face, a softening, a focusing, like a man finding the right distance from a painting. What would you do differently? And May, for the first time since sitting down, forgot to be afraid. She talked about hydration ratios, about the difference between a fast proof and a slow one, about how the palace ovens ran 30 degrees too hot on the left side. She talked with her hands, which was dangerous, but for once her hands were describing something they understood. She's extraordinary. The thought surfaced in Daniel's mind unbidden, plain and true as a heartbeat. She has no idea. She has absolutely no idea what she looks like right now. He said nothing. He just watched, and the watching felt like more than it should have. They were in the middle of a genuinely interesting discussion about the structural integrity of sourdough when the moment of comfort betrayed her. Her loosening hand brushed the stem of her goblet. It wobbled. She lunged. Her sleeve caught a silver salt cellar shaped like a dragon. The cellar flew, spinning, trailing salt like a comet. It landed in a tureen of mushroom soup with a plop that would haunt her nightmares. Soup. Everywhere. On the tablecloth, on the platters, on the front of Daniel's white shirt, a spectacular brown constellation. May froze. She stared at the stain. Daniel looked down at his shirt. He looked at the salt dragon, drowning face down in soup. He looked at May. "Well," he said, dabbing at the stain with a napkin that made it worse. "I suppose that's one way to season the soup." May laughed. It came from nowhere, shaky, slightly hysterical, unstoppable. He laughed with her, and the sound of both of them together in that soup-spattered room was the first thing all evening that felt honest. The weekly dinners became the anchor of May's new life. Her duties shifted quietly away from anything ancient, fragile, or capable of generating an incident report. She polished the indestructible boots of the palace guard, and she baked. She baked every day, filling the kitchens with the scent of warm bread, rosemary focaccia, lemon poppy seed cake. The quality of the palace's baked goods improved so dramatically that council meetings became noticeably less contentious. Julian, who had previously described the palace bread as structurally adequate, was once spotted eating an entire loaf of her sourdough over the course of a single meeting, tearing off pieces with the focus of a man in a trance. And once a week, the blue dress. The dinner. The slowly thinning awkwardness. The second dinner, she knocked over a water pitcher. The third, she put her elbow in butter. The fourth, she laughed at something he said and gestured so hard she sent a bread roll sailing across the table. It hit him squarely in the chest. "Incoming," he said calmly, and caught the second one. She'd tried to catch the first and knocked another off the plate in the attempt, without looking up from his wine. His reflexes were becoming extraordinary. Julian remarked that the king's hand-eye coordination had improved more from dining with May than from 10 years of weapons training. By the fifth dinner, she noticed he'd started sitting slightly forward in his chair. Not away from the table, the way you'd sit if you were afraid of flying objects, but toward it. Toward her. She filed this away and didn't examine it. He noticed things. That was the problem. He noticed that she ate her chicken with precise, careful bites, but tore her bread with her hands, fast and unself-conscious. He noticed that she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking, and behind her right when she was nervous. He noticed that she was nervous less often now. She's not afraid of us anymore. The thought arrived warm and plain. She's still afraid of the table settings, but not of us. This matters. This matters more than it should. The sixth dinner, he tried to compliment her, and it went sideways almost immediately. "The sourdough you made for the council meeting," he began, in the measured tone he used for diplomatic openings. Julian ate an entire loaf. "Julian eats my bread with the same expression he uses for everything," May said. Mild disapproval. "That is his approval face. You should have seen his disapproval face. He confiscated the ambassador's scone once, just took it right off the plate, said it was a security risk." May snorted. "A security risk." "The man is thorough," Daniel paused. He had been trying to say something about how the bread was remarkable, and how the person who made it was also remarkable, and how he found himself thinking about both of these things at odd hours. What came out was, "You have very capable hands." The silence that followed was catastrophic. "I mean, the baking," he said too quickly. "Your technique, the way you... the kneading, specifically, is... We are dying. We are dying. And Julian is not here to save us. And we have told the Omega she has capable hands, like a man inspecting a horse." May's face was doing something complicated. It was trying to decide between mortification and delight, and had settled on an expression that was somehow both. "Thank you, sire. My hands appreciate the recognition." "Daniel," he corrected, desperately grateful for any conversational lifeline. "And I didn't mean... I just meant that watching you bake is..." He stopped, regrouped, abandoned the compliment entirely. "Would you like more wine?" "Please," May said, and her voice was shaking, but not from embarrassment. She was trying very hard not to laugh. She was losing. He poured. She pressed her lips together. He caught her eye, and the corner of his own mouth twitched, betraying him completely. "Capable hands," she repeated, and they both lost it. One dinner, about 8 weeks in, Daniel arrived late. He dropped into his chair without his usual composure and let out a breath that seemed to come from near his shoes. "Bad day?" May ventured. "Lord Edmund Thorne spent 3 hours telling me my grain tariff proposal was, quote, fiscally adventurous." Daniel rubbed his face. "He means reckless. He always means reckless. He just wraps it in enough syllables that I can't officially take offense." "That sounds exhausting." "The man uses 11 words where 1 would do. I once timed him. He took 4 minutes to say no." May, cautiously buttering a roll, paused. 4 minutes? 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Julian has a stopwatch. We take bets. She laughed, a real one, not the nervous deflections of the early dinners. Daniel's eyes caught it, and something in his face let go. "You're different here," she said before she could stop herself. "Here?" "At dinner. With me. You're less kingly." She was terrified she'd insulted him, but what crossed his face wasn't offense. It was relief. A naked, bone-deep relief that he hadn't meant to show. She just saw us. Actually saw us. Not the performance. Us. And she's still sitting there. "That," he said quietly, "might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." One evening, May arrived to find the dining room empty. A note in the king's hand read, "Change of venue. Meet me in the West Gallery." The gallery, site of the Shield incident, now held 2 armchairs before the fireplace, a table between them with her lemon poppy seed cakes and 2 mugs of tea. "Fewer breakable surfaces," Daniel said. "A wise precaution, sire." "Daniel," she tried it. "Daniel." Bold and warm and right. He wanted to ask something. She could tell from the way he was holding his tea, too carefully, the way people hold things when their hands want to do something else. "The ceremony of silent approval," he said. "It's next week." May knew it. The whole court staring at the king in absolute silence for 10 minutes. Any sound was a bad omen. Any disruption was political ammunition. "Lord Edmund Thorne wants to cancel it," Daniel said. "He says the spiritual malaise might manifest." "Cancel it? That would be admitting something's wrong." "Exactly." He set his tea down. "But if I hold it and something happens, if someone hiccups, he'll call it proof my reign is cursed." He was trapped. May looked at him and felt the ache of recognition. He was afraid of not being good enough. She was afraid of the same thing. Same wound, different costume. "You can't cancel it," she said, firm with a certainty that surprised them both. "You stare them down." He searched her face. "And the ghost?" "The ghost will be in the farthest broom closet in the castle, wrapped in quilted padding, surrounded by nothing breakable." He laughed, the real one, and it filled the gallery ceiling. Then the air changed, thickened. His gaze dropped to her mouth. She should have deflected. She leaned in instead. A fraction. A mile. He leaned too, slow, deliberate. "She's right here. She's right here, and she isn't pulling away. And we have wanted this for weeks, and we cannot pretend we haven't." His lips were inches from hers. She could feel his breath. A thunderous crash from the grand hall, metal shrieking, 1,000 small objects scattering across marble. They sprang apart like they'd been stung. They ran. The grand hall. Sir Reginald the Resplendent, flat on his back, helmet rolling away. Scattered around him, glittering in torchlight, buttons, cufflinks, earrings, coins, a familiar signet ring, and a small collection of decorative thimbles. Standing on Sir Reginald's chest, chittering triumphantly, was a glimmer weasel. Julian arrived from the opposite corridor, sword drawn, and skidded to a halt. He stared. "He's been nesting," Julian said, his voice hollow. "Inside the armor. For months." He held up his signet ring, recovered from the hoard. "I accused 3 servants and a visiting dignitary for this." The weasel chittered again, seemingly proud. May looked at the crime scene. The steady part of her brain offered, without irony. "We have been blamed for the work of a weasel. This is unjust. But the weasel is also competent." The day of the ceremony of silent approval dawned gray. The weasel explained the lesser hauntings, jangling, disappearing objects, but the bigger events remained May's. Lord Edmund Thorne had ensured this, speaking in grave tones about the weasel being a familiar of the restless spirit. He'd used the word harbinger 4 times in one meeting. Julian had counted. "I want you in your room," Daniel told May. "Door locked, nothing fragile within 10 feet. She agreed. She couldn't rest. She paced her chamber, turning Edmund Thorne over and over in her mind. His consistency. His theatrical gravity. The way his advice always seemed designed to make Daniel look weakest. She picked up the lumpy embroidered pillow on her chair, a gift from another maid, and frowned. It was oddly heavy. She found scissors and snipped a seam. Inside, a small carved metal bird. A whistle with no visible mouthpiece. She recognized the metalwork, the Royal Artificer's workshop. 2 days ago. Edmund Thorne in the corridor, charming and sympathetic, patting her shoulder. "Such a trial for you, my dear. I pray you find your peace." He'd squeezed her arm with grandfatherly warmth. She'd felt grateful. She'd felt seen. She now realized she'd felt his hand in her apron pocket. A book she'd been dusting weeks ago flashed in her mind. Geological Peculiarities of the Severn Valley. She'd only read it because she'd knocked it off a shelf and felt guilty enough to put it back properly. And putting it back properly had turned into reading 3 chapters because her brain worked like that sometimes. The palace was built over a network of resonating crystal caves. Certain frequencies caused sympathetic vibrations. A sound barely audible in one place could become a tremor somewhere else. The throne room sat directly above the great crystal chamber. The whistle wasn't broken. It was tuned to a frequency that would make the throne room shake. And she was supposed to be in her room right now, holding the evidence, positioned as the perfect suspect. The clumsy Omega with the cursed whistle. Edmund Thorne's scapegoat. She ran. The corridors were empty. Everyone was in the throne room. Her feet were silent on the runner carpets, which was a minor miracle given that she'd tripped on these same carpets at least 4 times in the past month. The confident part of her brain was fully engaged, and for once, the rest of her was too frightened to argue with it. "We know this building. Every corridor, every shortcut. We have cleaned every inch of it. We are the most qualified person in this castle to run through it at speed." This was, technically, true. She did know the building. She knew that the 3rd floor east corridor had a loose flagstone. She knew the servants' passage behind the tapestry hall cut 40 seconds off the route. She knew the side door to the throne room was never locked because the hinges were rusted and nobody had gotten around to fixing them, because the person who was supposed to report it kept getting distracted by falling off ladders. 8 minutes into the ceremony, the throne room was wound tight enough to shatter. Daniel sat on the sunstone throne, robes settled, face composed, hands resting on the throne's arms as if he'd been born there. Every inch the Alpha King. Inside he was counting seconds and trying not to think about how his left foot had fallen asleep. We should not have crossed our legs. The foot is compromised. If we need to stand quickly, this will be a problem. This is what we get for trying to look regal. Regal is overrated. His eyes swept the crowd. Then a low hum filled the air. Not a sound exactly, more a vibration felt in the back teeth. Daniel's eyes found Edmund Thorne, near the back, very still, and on his face a smile that had no business being there. Something is very wrong. That is not the face of a loyal counselor. That is the face of a man who knows what happens next. The floor trembled. Stone groaned. The crowd gasped. Bodies swayed. The side door crashed open. May burst through, chest heaving, hair wild, eyes blazing. "Stop!" Every head snapped toward her. Thorne's face contorted. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in her room, holding the evidence. He blew harder into the whistle. The tremor intensified. A crack spidered across the ceiling. May ran, not toward Daniel, toward Thorne. She was not fast. She was not graceful. She dodged a panicking lord, miscalculated, and shoulder-checked a duchess's hat clean off her head. The duchess screamed. May kept going. She ducked under a flailing arm, skidded on a dropped handkerchief, went sideways, recovered, and kept running in what could generously be described as a forward direction. A guard reached for her and she went under him like a cat under a fence, 80% luck, 20% of flexibility she didn't know she had. Obstacles cleared. Maintaining forward momentum, approaching target. She was a woman propelled by pure adrenaline and a complete inability to stop once she'd started, and the combination was, against all probability, working. 10 feet from Thorne. 5. Her foot found the edge of a ceremonial rug. Oh no. Not from the confident part of her brain. That part had a different assessment entirely. Adjusting trajectory. Ground approach. Still viable. The fall was monumental. Full body, arms out, face first. But her flailing hand caught the corner of a massive tapestry. The founding of the Severan dynasty, floor to ceiling, iron mounted. Her momentum ripped the mounting from the wall. The tapestry swung in a great sweeping arc. Thorne, focused on his whistle, didn't see it. The iron rod caught him across the shoulders and drove him flat. The whistle skittered across marble. The humming stopped. The tremor died. Silence. May lay on the floor, elbow throbbing, knee on fire, dress torn, covered in plaster dust. The tapestry was draped over Thorne like a burial shroud. He wasn't moving. The entire court stared at her. Target neutralized. Minimal collateral damage. The Duchess's hat is acceptable losses. Daniel launched from the throne. His dead foot betrayed him on the first step, more of a lurch than a stride. But he turned it into forward momentum and no one questioned it, because he was the king, and kings do not stumble. He knelt beside her. His hands on her arms were gentle and shaking. "May, are you hurt?" "My dignity," she mumbled. "Send a search party." He helped her sit up. His eyes were bright and raw and not performing a single thing. "I don't care about any of this." He gestured at the court, the tapestry, the unconscious traitor. "I don't care if you knock down every wall. Just don't leave again." It was a public declaration, delivered in the wreckage of a failed coup, by a king who had just limped off his throne because his foot was asleep. "I can't promise about the walls," she whispered. "They're very knockable." He smiled, the real one. And in the throne room, surrounded by the ruin of her own magnificent clumsiness, King Daniel Severan kissed the ghost of Severan Palace. The court erupted. The ceremony of silent approval ended at 9 minutes and 43 seconds. It was the most successful one in living memory. Edmund Thorne woke in the dungeons with a headache the size of a kingdom and a treason charge to match. The second whistle, found in May's room, was evidence enough. His theatricality had been his undoing. He'd left a trail a glimmer weasel could follow. The weasel had, in fact, found and attempted to steal one of the whistles. It was recovered from Sir Reginald's chest cavity. The political narrative was Julian's masterpiece. May Swift was a divinely touched agent of the moon goddess. She didn't trip, she was guided. The falling shield was a warning, the vase a portent. The tapestry takedown was proof. May found this so mortifying she couldn't look at Julian for a week. Julian considered it his finest work. The dinners continued. No debt now. No pretense. Just them. A week after the ceremony, May was polishing Sir Reginald's dented helmet in the West Gallery when Daniel found her. "He'll never be the same," she said quietly, rubbing a cloth over a deep scratch. She wasn't talking about the armor. Daniel stood beside her. "Scars give character." "I almost ruined you." The name still felt bold. She used it anyway. Edmund was right about one thing: my messiness. He used it. He used me to hurt you, because I was the perfect weapon. The clumsy Omega everyone already believed was a disaster. She was saying the thing underneath the laughter and the bread and the dinners, that she was a liability, that loving her was a risk. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he took the helmet from her hands and led her to the armchairs. "My father was a legend," he said. "Strong, decisive, infallible. When I took the throne, I put him on like a costume every morning, performed him, and it worked. Everyone bought it, almost including me." He looked at her, and the king was gone and the man was everything. When the haunting started, it proved what I'd always known, that underneath the performance, there was nothing. Just a scared man rattling around in a great man's castle. His voice went rough. He stopped, started again. Then I found out it was you, and all of it, the performance, the fear, stopped mattering. Because you were the most real thing in the entire castle. You burned a batch of rolls once and cried about it, and then baked a better batch at 3 a.m. because you couldn't stand to leave it wrong. You charged through a room of the most powerful people in the kingdom to save me, and your main weapon was a rug. A sound escaped her. Laugh or sob, she wasn't sure. "You don't make me weak. You're the first thing that's made me strong in a way that's mine. Not my father's. Mine." She was crying. Not the mortified tears she'd shed so many times in this castle. These were different. These were the sound of something cracking open that had been sealed shut for years. "I think you saved me too," she said, voice breaking. "From what?" She wiped her eyes. Her sleeve went through her tea. Neither noticed. "From believing I was only the mess. You're the first person who looked at the mess and the bread and the person and decided all three were worth keeping." He pulled her close. She fit. And the deep, steady part of her, the part that had always known she was enough, the part she could never hear over the noise of her own shame, settled into certainty. "We are home. We have been home for a while now." The next morning, Julian found Daniel in the royal forge. "Preventative infrastructure?" Julian asked. Daniel plunged hot metal into water. He held up a sturdy iron brace. "I'm bolting Sir Reginald to the floor." "On whose authority?" "Mine. I'm the king. I can bolt things." "And the reason?" May felt bad about his dents. "I want her to walk through the grand hall without worrying about flattening a national hero." Julian watched the king carefully filing a bracket so it wouldn't scratch marble. He said nothing. But later that day, he quietly drew up plans to replace every narrow corridor table in the palace with wider, heavier, significantly less tippable alternatives. He told no one. That afternoon, a royal guard delivered a box to the kitchens. Inside, on velvet, a set of baking tools. Polished steel, rosewood handles, perfectly balanced. The note? "So your hands have something worthy of them. D." May responded with lavender scones so transcendent that the delivery guard stole one and spent the rest of his shift looking like a man who had glimpsed the divine. Weeks passed, him learning her flowers, her learning to sit in council meetings, offering observations that cut through hours of blustering. Julian started writing her comments down. One evening, Daniel asked her to run with him, as wolves. May hadn't shifted in years. The last time had been an accident. She'd been startled by a bee, of all things, and had shifted in the middle of the palace herb garden. Martha had found her 20 minutes later, a scruffy brown wolf sitting very still among the rosemary, looking deeply embarrassed. "What if I fall?" she asked. "Then you fall. I'll be there." "What if I fall on you?" "Then I'll have a good story." "What if I shift wrong and get stuck halfway, and you have to explain to the court why the queen is half wolf at breakfast?" Then Julian will issue a statement calling it a bold new fashion choice. He's managed worse. Her shift was ungainly. Everything cracked and stretched and rearranged itself in a way that felt like being turned inside out by someone who was mostly but not entirely sure how anatomy worked. She stumbled on paws that felt too big, legs too long, the ground suddenly very close and very detailed. A scruffy brown wolf, lean and small beside his sleek black form. He was massive, all muscle and presence, even as a wolf. She felt like a tennis ball next to a grand piano. He didn't wait for her to feel ready, just started walking, easy and slow, and she followed because following felt simpler than standing still. Then trotting, then running. He was faster, but he matched her stride and never once pulled ahead. And something happened. Her wolf body didn't overthink. It didn't run projections on what might go wrong. It just moved. Paws finding ground, muscles knowing what to do, instinct replacing the anxious inner monologue that had narrated her every waking moment for years. The ground was where it expected to be. Her body did what she asked it to. For the first time in her life, May understood what it felt like to trust herself. They stopped on a cliff above the sleeping capital. The air was cold and sharp and smelled of pine and distance. He bumped his nose against hers. She bumped back, hard enough that he staggered half a step, which was either affection or poor depth perception. They howled. His, deep, resonant, the call of a king who'd stopped performing. Hers, clear and bright and joyful, the sound of someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. The proposal happened during a minor disaster, because of course it did. Royal Library, diplomatic banquet guest list. May reached for a high shelf, overestimated, and pulled 3 heavy books onto her own head. She went down in an avalanche of paper. Daniel knelt. Anything broken? My relationship with gravity? We're not speaking. He helped gather pages, then stopped. May, the debt is paid. She looked up. It is? Your takedown of Thorn. Settled. Cold moved through her. So the dinners stop. A pause that lasted 7 years. That would be the logical conclusion, he said. There it was, the end of the excuse. The part where reality returned and the king remembered he was a king and she was a woman who couldn't cross a room without incident. I understand, she said. Her voice held. Thank you for everything, Daniel. He caught her wrist. Look at me. She did. His eyes were blazing. The debt was always a joke. It was the only way I could keep you close because I was too much of a coward to say what I meant. She is going to leave. She is standing right there thinking about leaving, and every single part of us refuses. Tell her now. We are done being a coward about this. He took both her hands. I want dinner with you for the rest of my life. I want to argue about bread and watch you accidentally weaponize table settings. I want to be the king who's strong enough to love the most chaotic woman in the kingdom and build a world where she never has to apologize for it. He took a breath. I love you, May. Not in spite of the chaos, because of it. You are the most extraordinary, brilliant, and beautifully disastrous person I have ever met. Marry me, before you accidentally topple a neighboring country. We love him. We have loved him since the bread conversation. This is not new. Say yes. Say yes immediately. Yes, she breathed, laughing and crying simultaneously, a beautiful wreck. Obviously, catastrophically, yes. He kissed her so thoroughly that neither of them noticed her elbow knock an inkpot off the desk, sending a dramatic black splash across an ancient map. Julian, outside the door, because Julian was always outside the door, heard the crash, consulted his pocket watch, and wrote, 4:17 p.m., engagement confirmed. 1 casualty, map 14th century, cartographer royal. Acceptable losses. On their first wedding anniversary, King Daniel and Queen May Severin stood in the grand hall. Sir Reginald the Resplendent, bolted to the floor forever, gleamed. The Glimmer Weasel, Reginald II, Reggie, held the title of royal taster and had grown fat on shortbread. May had baked the cake, 5 tiers, lemon and elderflower. The security detail had been briefed. "You're nervous," Daniel murmured. "I'm carrying a structurally ambitious cake through a room of important people. Physics is against me. If it falls, we invent floor cake, new tradition." "You can't invent traditions." "I'm the king. I bolted a suit of armor to the floor and called it heritage preservation." They carried it together. It wobbled once. Her heel found a loose floorboard he'd sworn was fixed, and the room held its breath. But his hand was steady. The cake held. Applause. Later, their chambers, last slice. "To my beautiful catastrophe," he said. "To my ridiculously patient king." She reached for his hand. Her sleeve caught the wine glass. Red spread across white linen. She froze. The old horror flickered. Faint now, an echo, but still there. Daniel looked at the stain, looked at her, picked up his own glass, poured it deliberately beside hers, and set it down. "There," he said, and took her hand. "Now they match."